Hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club, and also a proud City Club member. It's my honor to welcome all of you to our debate between two of the three candidates for governor of the state of Ohio. With us today are Democratic Party candidate Ed FitzGerald and Green Party candidate Anita Rios. The Republican in the race, incumbent Governor John Kasich, declined our invitation. Kasich is, of course, not the only incumbent to decline to debate this year. He's joined by incumbents and poll leaders of both parties who are choosing to sidestep these political trappings and traditions in favor of other opportunities to connect with voters. Still, we are pleased that Mr. FitzGerald and Ms. Rios are both here to discuss the important issues facing Ohioans in 2014 and for the coming years. As many of you know, Mr. FitzGerald has been the county executive in Cuyahoga County for the last 3.5 years, a little more. Prior to that, he was the mayor of Lakewood. Ms. Rios hails from Toledo, where she works in the mental health field and is a union leader in the AFL-CIO. Here to moderate our debate today is Robert Higgs. Bob is the Columbus Bureau Chief for the Northeast Ohio Media Group, providing content for the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com. And Bob is going to explain the format and the rules and get us started. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thanks, Dan. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. Good to see all of you. Thank you, Mr. FitzGerald, Ms. Rios. Here's the format that we'll follow for the evening. Both candidates will begin with a 3-minute opening statement. We determined the order earlier by coin toss. Ms. Rios will go first. Mr. FitzGerald will go second. And then we'll get to questions from me. Questions directed to both candidates will receive a 90-second response. If I direct a question to a specific candidate, that candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, and the opponent will have a 30-second rebuttal time. And we'll continue that same format into the second half of the program when we'll get questions from all of you. Lastly, I'll ask them a summative final question. They'll each have 3 minutes to respond to that. Throughout the debate, the candidates will be notified when they have 15 seconds left in their time, and then when their time is up. And I think if we're ready, we can begin. Ms. Rios, you're first.
Thank you. I would like to thank the City Club, Mr. FitzGerald, and all the activists of the Green Party who have made this campaign possible. In particular, my running mate, Dr. Robert Higgs. I would also like to thank my husband, Robert Hannon, and my sons, Gabriel and Alexander. It is a sad commentary on the state of politics that the governor has refused to be here tonight. We are not here for the benefit of the candidates, but rather to provide the voters with an opportunity to compare and contrast. Whether he stands here with us tonight or not, I think that we must not forget the great harm that his policies have done to women, to workers, and to communities. Like many Americans, I believe that our political process is very broken. But I also believe that third parties can play an important role in making real the promise of democracy. Last year, the state legislature passed a law that eliminated all the minor parties in Ohio. We filed a lawsuit and were successful. Then we launched a write-in campaign and were successful with that as well. To maintain party status here in Ohio, we must get 2% of the vote. And that is certainly a very important goal of this campaign, but it is not the only goal of this campaign. We believe that we are the only candidates who will abolish the death penalty here in Ohio, who will seek clemency for the Lucasville Five, who will use all the tools and resources of the governor's office to put an end to fracking. We are committed to closing the gap between the rich and the poor by investing in workers rather than in large corporations who have failed to provide a stable economy and who have enriched themselves. We strive to bring down the cost of higher education and to provide single-payer health care that includes access to birth control and abortions. We would provide statewide amnesty for undocumented immigrants and legalize marijuana. In short, we would use all the tools and resources of the governor's office to create genuine, meaningful social change. I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. My parents are settled-out migrant farm workers. My dad is a retired Jeep worker and a former UAW member. My husband of 33 years, Robert Hannon, is a postal worker, he has also been a union steward, as have I been. For many years, I was a mental health case manager, and I was also the head of my union. I have negotiated union contracts, and I feel that I have lived the American dream, but that American dream has been hawked, and for the sake of coming generations, we must demand it back.
Thank you. Mr. FitzGerald?
Thank you very much. Thank you to the City Club for hosting us. The City Club is really a great Cleveland institution for more than 100 years, and it's a privilege to be here. I think the stature of this location in this institution makes it even more startling that Governor Kasich has refused to participate. One of the things that Ms. Rios and I have in common, besides being one of 8 children, which we both were, she's one of 7 sisters, I have 6 sisters, which is a great way to grow up, is that we believe that we have a responsibility to the average person, to the common person, that it's not just about representing those that are the most powerful, those that can buy access. You have to make yourselves available to the people, answer their questions, and respond to them. And part of the way that you do that is through public debate. And for the governor to dodge this debate is, I think, it's not only cowardly, I suppose, politically, but it also really shows a level of disrespect to the voters. And I hope he's held accountable for that. Let me say this in terms of what I think the biggest difference is between Governor Kasich's approach to this state and what my approach would be. And I'll go ahead and speak for him. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. I think the biggest problem with the state in the last 4 years is that it's been run for the benefit of a very small group of people. We've been promised that we were going to be given an economy that was going to outperform the rest of the country, and we've been underperforming the rest of the country. As a matter of fact, we just got additional information within the last 24 hours or so that we are ranked 45th out of 50 states in job creation. We've had 23 months in a row of being below the national average in job creation. This is not a record to be proud of. It's not a record that we were promised we were going to get when Governor Kasich was elected. And the theory of how we were going to have an economy that was actually better than that was that we were going to give tax cuts, income tax cuts, and that was going to stimulate an economic boom. There's 2 problems with that. One is, who got those tax cuts? And the answer to that is, by a great degree of magnitude, it was the wealthiest and the most powerful people and the biggest corporations in the state. That's who got the benefit of the fiscal decisions the last 4 years. Who paid for them? Because those tax cuts have a price tag attached to them. And the answer is, you paid for them. Everybody's sales taxes went up. That hit working people and the poor particularly hard. We lost hundreds of millions of dollars out of public education. We lost 50% of local government funds, which hit our police departments and our fire departments, our EMS departments, our drug treatment programs in this state. So we've had a very clear philosophy in the last 4 years that if we just give a lot of benefits to the wealthiest people instead of the average citizen, that we'll thrive. But the record is clear that that hasn't worked, and we need to head in a different direction, and hopefully will after November's election. Thank you.
I'm glad you both mentioned economy and jobs in your opening. I'd like to drill down a little bit into that. This first question is for both of you. You've both raised some views of the governor's policies. What I'm interested in is what you would do specifically to address the sluggish economic recovery in Ohio, to address what critics are saying is too many new jobs or low-wage jobs, and to try and narrow what seems to be a growing income gap between the top and the bottom wages. Ms. Rios, why don't you go first?
Okay, so I come from Toledo, Ohio. I just want to very quickly digress for a minute and correct my introduction. I am not currently employed as a mental health case manager. That was many years ago. I'm currently unemployed. I worked at the abortion clinic that was closed by the laws that were put in place by Governor Kasich. So that's one job that he lost in Ohio. But in terms of the economy, I would very much like to see a resurgence in genuine manufacturing. We have Rust Belt towns like Toledo and Youngstown, even Cleveland, who have a wealth of experienced workers who have done those jobs, who know how to make manufacturing run. And I think we need to empower those workers. I would love to see some of those empty factories in Toledo and in Youngstown and places like that filled with entrepreneurs, filled with workers who are going to take them over and who are going to start manufacturing once again. I think we can invest in that. I think that worker collectives, worker-owned businesses are a wonderful way of revitalizing communities, and I don't think it's rocket science. This is happening. It's happening in Detroit. It's happening here in Cleveland to some extent, and also in Chicago, and I think that we need to put more of the state's resources behind that.
Okay. Mr. Fitzgerald?
Sure. Well, if Governor Kasich was here, he would probably disagree with the premise of your question, because you said the economy is sluggish. And according to Governor Kasich, the economy in Ohio is a miracle because it's doing so well. Let's get serious about his claims about job creation. Here's the facts, folks. Every governor that was running for re-election in 2010 was presiding over a state that had lost jobs, because all 50 states had lost jobs between 2006 and 2010. From 2010 to 2014, all 50 states have gained jobs. And so what Governor Kasich hopes nobody realizes is that if he just keeps repeating that we've added jobs, that means somehow he's responsible. If he's doing something special, then all 49 states are as well. And I don't hear the Republican Governors Association praising Jerry Brown in California. So the question is, what should we really be doing? Since we know that we're actually 45th out of 50 states, what should we be doing differently? I would just mention a couple things. Number one is we need to be investing more in small businesses. There's been a lot of, in my opinion, rip-offs, a lot of giveaways to big companies that have sometimes exported jobs overseas. Governor Kasich has been very bad about standing up to some of the trade deals that have been very bad for American workers, including in the manufacturing sector. And I think we also need to look at the fact that we've created a lot of low-wage jobs, which makes it even more important that we do something about the minimum wage. We ought to increase the minimum wage. There's 1 million people in the state who need it, and we ought to do it.
Both mentioned taxes, income taxes in particular. The governor has been an advocate of reducing, if not eliminating, the state's income tax. He pitches it as a good economic policy for Ohio. I'd like you each to address that. Is it a good policy? Would you get rid of the income tax? Do you believe it should be eliminated? If so, how? And if not, what would your tax policy be? And as part of that, would you seek to reverse some of the tax changes that we've seen in the last 4 years? Mr. Fitzgerald, you go first.
Sure. Well, here's what Governor Kasich got away with doing back in 2010, and to some extent he's getting away with it again. He said he was all for eliminating the Ohio income tax, and he never got pinned down about how he was going to pay for that. What we now know is, yes, they did reduce the income taxes in Ohio, but they raised other taxes. That was not disclosed to voters back in 2014. Why are income taxes terrible, but property taxes are great, and sales taxes are great, and increasing the commercial activities tax is great, and taking away the homestead exemption for seniors is a really good deal? Why did all those taxes go up in order to pay for income taxes where the overwhelming benefit was given to those who are already doing very, very well? So my philosophy has always been with tax cuts or changes to the tax code, very simple. First of all, you don't do a tax cut if you can't afford it. You don't pay for a tax cut by raising taxes on poor and working people. You don't pay for a tax cut by taking money away from local communities when you know darn well they're going to have to raise taxes or lay people off. You don't do it by cutting money out of education. And if you are going to give tax relief, and what I would argue for is if we find ourselves in a position in the next 4 years where we can actually afford additional tax relief, let's give it exclusively to the people who suffered during the recession. That's middle-class families, working people, and the poor. The wealthy people in the state were already doing very, very well. They don't need any additional help.
As a follow-up to that, would you seek to reverse some of those changes that we have seen?
I think what I've said throughout the campaign is that I think that our taxation system is unfair. And I'm not running on a tax increase philosophy, but I think we need to be able to fund the basic things that we need to do with state government, like infrastructure, social services, everything from heroin treatment to hunger relief, things like job creation, and we can look at taxes. But what I've done as a mayor and as a county executive is I always try to say, is there a way for us to live within our means? I was able to do that as mayor of Lakewood. We had a number of initiatives, as some of you may know. We've done that in Cuyahoga County, where we had initiatives with, again, job creation, early childhood education, higher education, infrastructure, a number of things, and we were able to do that without raising taxes. So I don't default to the position of saying, well, as soon as I get in there, let's look at raising taxes. But if changes are made to the tax code, I think it ought to be done with middle-class folks in mind and the poor in mind, as opposed to giving additional benefits to the wealthy.
Ms. Rios?
Well, I would say there is one tax that I would definitely bring back, and that's the estate tax. It only has an impact on a very small percentage of wealthy people, and I think that it's a tax that many of our communities depend on. Secondly, I would say that we need to change the formula of how we do taxes, because we haven't actually reduced any of the expenses. We've just shifted the burden of those expenses to communities, and that increases the division between the haves and the have-nots, because wealthy communities, of course, will do well. Poorer communities that are struggling will struggle more. So I think it levels the playing field when you have that tax system come from the state rather than from municipalities.
You mentioned bringing back the estate tax. Would you seek to bring back some of the, or put back in place some of the income tax reductions that were there for the upper end of the income?
You know, I haven't really taken a close look at them. My feeling is that I think, my feeling is I think that we probably have plenty of money in government already. I think that we can do just fine with the tax levels as they are. However, there are some taxes that are blatantly unfair, and I think it is very unfair to, I think the elimination of the estate tax was very unfair.
Thank you. I want to ask a question about character and its role in helping voters determine which candidate to select, and your views on that. In August, there were revelations. Mr. FitzGerald didn't have a driver's license for several years, and that he'd been found in Westlake in a parking lot with a woman who wasn't his wife during the evening. And the reason I raise this is because those revelations certainly had an impact on the campaign and on the election. And what I'd like to hear from you is where character issues come into play. How should voters evaluate events from your past as they're evaluating who to pick, and balance those with issues? I'll let you go first, Mr. FitzGerald.
Well, look, if you run for governor, they go through your whole life and they try to figure out the worst thing that they could say about you, possibly. And if the worst thing they can say is that I was careless about a driver's license and I let it to be expired, you know, so be it. I mean, that's the way that life goes, and that's the way that politics is sometimes. But I would just say this. If you look at the candidate who didn't bother to show up, which I think is also an indication of character, by the way. If you look at the candidate that didn't bother to show up today, and you look at his career outside of public office, you're talking about somebody that was making a 7-figure salary from a Wall Street bank while advising public pensions to invest in that bank, and then just public pensions in Ohio, Bob, lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, what's a greater moral issue? Now, I know that now, if somebody wants to say that somebody letting their license expire, which I certainly don't recommend, but if somebody wants to say that that is a great moral issue, that's fine. But the fact is, there are people that lost their pension money because of that. And your publication in particular found it much more fascinating about the status of somebody's driver's license than you did about really pretty egregious behavior. And that doesn't even count the things that happened in office under Governor Kasich, which I think also had moral implications as well. I mean, I'm somebody that's, you know, I've been married for 23 years, I have 4 children, and I have a record as a public servant of 15 years. And that isn't what has been at issue. What kind of a mayor was or I was a county executive, because the strategy on the other side has been to try to make this as superficial as an election as possible. That's reflected in all of their attacks, the fact that they won't deal with substance, and the fact that they won't even show up for a debate here today. It's all of a piece. That's what I would say to you.
That being the case, where does that leave the voter then when they're balancing all this out?
Here's what I would say, particularly to voters here in Northeast Ohio. I've been county executive for 4 years. I was in municipal office for 12 years before that. I did things like clean up corruption in this county. We made this the most honest and ethical county administration that I believe exists in the state of Ohio. We created the biggest economic and jobs program in the state of Ohio of any county. We had an early childhood education initiative. We had an infrastructure initiative. We had a renewable energy initiative. We did things like fight for voting rights. We did things like fight for the rights of same-sex couples to have health benefits. Those are important issues that affect people's lives. And if somebody wants to balance all of that and say, well, gosh, all those things are great, but on the other hand, somebody let their driver's license expire, I would just say that respectfully, that isn't really balancing what matters or somebody's actual ability to perform in public office. And that's what I would ask people to do.
I would like to answer that as well. One is, I think, shame on the media for focusing on that. And secondly, I would like to say that what Governor Kasich did with Jobs Ohio, that should be criminal. I mean, he took our tax dollars, he took our money, and he put it into this completely opaque entity where we have no ability to see what it's doing and whether or not it's being effective. To me, that should be criminal. Oh, and I'm really glad nobody's figured out any of my youthful indiscretions.
What would you say then to a voter who asks you questions about character of, say, an opponent? And
I would say that Jobs Ohio, Governor Kasich's history on Wall Street speak more loudly to my concerns about character than Mr. FitzGerald. And, you know, I'm not trying to give this gentleman a pass. I've never met him before today. However, as a voter myself, what do I care about? I care about what Governor John Kasich has done to women in Toledo, Ohio by closing down all the abortion clinics. I care about what he has done with Jobs Ohio. I care about him gutting our communities, taking so much of the tax revenue away from our communities to be able to cut taxes for wealthy people. To me, those are things that I could not accept in a leader.
let's talk for a moment about Lake Erie. In August, 400,000 people or so, I imagine you were one of them, went several days without drinking water because of an algal bloom out in the lake. The experts say we need to do something about farm runoff and about wastewater and stormwater runoff and overflows. The solutions seem to have great economic impact potential also, though. How do you attack the problem and get this under control? What needs to be done to protect the lake itself?
Well, one thing I would say is that these problems are not new. We've known about these problems for a very long time. I pulled out some documents that I had from Lake Erie water keepers that talk about these very problems, and those documents are a couple years old. So we knew that this problem was coming. And yes, it is largely related to the runoff and to the storm sewers. And two things. One, it's not rocket science to fix the runoff issue. There are many things that farmers can do to correct that. It's just that there have been no regulations put in place. Our leaders do not have the will to actually regulate the runoff. And once it's regulated, farmers will have clear direction about what they have to do in order to stop it. Secondly, we have paved over wetlands in Toledo. You know, Toledo was a swamp, and there are huge wetland areas that have been eliminated, but those wetland areas filter much of that runoff. They filter the lake, so we need to restore that as well. So I think that those are two important things that we have to do. And lastly, I would say, that happened in Toledo. Yes, we woke up one morning, we said, don't drink the water, don't even touch the water. And I would just say, I would draw a parallel with fracking. I think fracking is just as dangerous an issue, and we need to wake up and do something about that now.
One of the problems with our environmental strategy in this country is that we wait until something becomes a crisis before we actually do anything about it. And there's a lot of people to blame for that. There's policymakers to blame for that, and there's media that's to blame for that as well. Give you an example. 1 year ago, 1 year before the Toledo water crisis, county government, for the first time in its history, we brought together academic folks, folks from nonprofits, folks from government entities to talk about the water quality in our lake, and we invited the media to do it, and the Plain Dealer would not cover it. There was virtually no coverage of it whatsoever. And what people were complaining or warning about at that time was that we are approaching a crisis situation. But it's not just what we did, even though everybody could see this coming. Anybody that cared enough to look. You had people within the Ohio EPA who for years have been warning our policymakers that we have an unsustainable situation, particularly in western Lake Erie. This didn't happen all of a sudden. People saw it coming. And even after it happened, they are still, Governor Kasich and his friends are still having conversations about how they're going to balance the concerns of the fertilizer industry and balance everybody's need for safe drinking water. When it comes to safe drinking water, that is a moral issue. It's a human right, and you don't balance that. You protect it, you preserve it. Anything poisoning it needs to be regulated immediately, period. End of story.
The Ohio Constitution defines marriage as a union between one man and one woman. What is your position on same-sex marriage? And in regard to that, what should the state do? Both with an eye towards legally performed marriages in other states, same-sex marriages, and also should there be a change to allow same-sex marriages performed in Ohio? Yeah. Mr. FitzGerald, you can go first.
Sure. I think gays and lesbians should be entitled to absolutely equal rights in everything. That includes housing, employment, and marriage, period. It's a human rights issue. There's two ways to go on this issue. We can either be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. I salute some Republicans like Senator Portman that have eventually come around to doing the right thing. Some of you may remember that for about 2 or 3 hours, Governor Kasich was for civil unions at least, and then had a change of heart. He's wrong on this issue. And it not only is it the right thing to do morally, it's also the right thing to do economically. Our LGBT community is an important part of the economic fabric of this state, and we should put out a message nationwide that we're a welcoming and accepting state. And I'm sorry to say that it's been the courts that have had to push us. I wish our courts didn't have to remind us sometimes about what people's civil rights actually are. I know that's the way American history works sometimes, but I wish we had elected officials that had the guts to do the right thing, whether it's popular politically or not, especially when it comes to basic human rights. And that goes to the heart of what your question is and what kind of a state we should be.
Thank you. Ms. Rios?
I think gay marriage is an idea whose time has come. The polls show it. People are in favor of it. Unfortunately, I don't think our state legislature is in a position or in a mindset to support it at this point. But I do believe that the people of Ohio support it, and I believe that we will get that overturned. And I do hope that the courts get that right and overturn the ban on gay marriage.
Okay. Your transition.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying the Ohio gubernatorial debate with Democratic candidate Ed FitzGerald and Green Party candidate Anita Rios, moderated by Robert Higgs of the Northeast Ohio Media Group. We encourage you to formulate your questions now and ask that your questions be brief and to the point and, in fact, questions. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via our webcast, which is sponsored by the University of Akron. Our forums that are carried live or rebroadcast on 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, or 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream. They're also broadcast on many other radio stations across the region and country. Television broadcasts and radio broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. This Friday, October 24th, the City Club welcomes Montel Williams. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's debate is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Media Group, which is the City Club's sponsor of all politics and policy programming. We thank you very much for your support. Today, we also welcome guests at tables hosted by the Democratic Party of Cuyahoga County, Green Party of Cuyahoga County, North Shore AFL-CIO, and Rios for Governor. We thank you all for your support. Now we would like to return to our candidates for the traditional City Club Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, members and guests. Holding our microphones today are Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and our Marketing and Outreach Specialist, Kirsten Pianka. Our first question, please.
Hi there. Over a decade of the war on terror has only resulted in more and more terror. Weaponry is brought home to militarize our local police forces. And as a taxpayer, I'm personally sick and tired of subsidizing violence all over the globe, but mostly here in Ohio, and I want to know what you're going to do to find peaceful solutions to our problems.
Mr. FitzGerald, I'll take that first.
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's a good question. I'm a believer when it comes to law enforcement strategy in community-based solutions. It isn't just how much you can prosecute people. I was in law enforcement for 8 years, as you may know. I was an FBI agent and I was a prosecutor. And one of the lessons that I learned as a prosecutor, especially at the end of my career, is you can't prosecute your way out of a problem. One of the most depressing experiences I ever had as a prosecutor was prosecuting people sometimes for the second time after I'd already prosecuted them for the first time. So we're not going to incarcerate our way out of the problem. We're not going to prosecute our way out of the problem. To me, law enforcement strategies, and I have done this as both a mayor and as a county official, is to have more of a community policing strategy. That means building partnerships with the neighborhoods. That means building partnerships with human service organizations. And I would just say one other thing in the brief time that I have, because it's a complex issue, is that we have to recognize the link between poverty and crime. To pretend as if there is no link between chronic poverty, that individuals that find themselves in the justice system are not overwhelmingly folks that have been denied economic opportunities is foolish. And we have to make sure, it's predictable that we're going to be incarcerating certain individuals when they have been denied economic opportunities. And we have to recognize that causal relationship, I think.
Ms. Rios.
Okay, so I guess I heard that question a little bit differently as being one about what could a governor do to help us put an end to war? And I would certainly advocate for that. I think that our leaders are conduits to that next level of leaders, and I would certainly try to bring together a governor's group, an anti-war governor's group, Because I know that we have to push back on Washington on that issue. We need to let them know that we're tired of paying for drones and bombs and guns, and we're tired of having our young people come back maimed and injured, and that our communities need that money. We need to be able to do things like fix the water system in Toledo so that it doesn't run off into the lake. And you know, I'm looking at water rates that are going to go through the roof. Well, I would very much like our government to step up and return some of our tax dollars rather than squander it in some sad place doing some evil deed.
As Governor, what would be your stance on immigration coming to Ohio?
Ms.
I
Rios?
support amnesty for undocumented workers. I think that that's the fair and just thing to do. I also think that we need immigration reform because our borders are indeed porous, and that is a problem for us, and it's a problem for the people who are coming across those borders. And the only way to fix that is to have laws in place that are fair and that we can actually enforce. Lastly, I would say that we need to take a look back and consider what are the economic structures that have caused this. And I think we need to point back at NAFTA, and I think that we should try and repeal NAFTA.
Well, on the last point, I agree that trade deals, I think, have been a very bad deal for the American worker. I think it's been great for some countries, but I think they've been very bad for America, including NAFTA and some of the other trade deals. So I agree with my colleague here about that. I'm for immigration reform. I think we have to be really cognizant of the fact that when you have undocumented workers, it leads to a lot of abuse. It doesn't just mean that you undermine the American labor market, but those workers then are more subject to abuse because there isn't a way to really guarantee that they're not being exploited by their employers. And so I think we have to embrace immigration. If you take the Cleveland area as an example, if you look at the period of time when Cleveland was really thriving the most economically, it was also when we were welcoming immigrants from all over the world. So this whole, America has been kind of two minds about immigration. On the one hand, there's been people that have always been afraid of immigration, and there's plenty of people that play to those fears and prejudices. But on the other hand, we're a nation of immigrants, and I believe that's part of our strength. I don't think that immigrants are a threat to this country. I think overall they're actually of economic benefit to this country. We just have to figure out the proper way to integrate them into our society. Thanks for the question.
As a former teacher, I'm very concerned with the funding of schools in Ohio. It's been ruled by the Ohio Supreme Court that it's unconstitutional. Yet the governor has, in fact, even a former Democratic governor has done nothing to solve the problem. If we are going to have a prosperous state, and we're going to have a well-educated state, and our schools are, especially in urban, working class neighborhoods, they're very underfunded. It is criminal, and I hope you agree with me that something should be done about it.
What would you do to address education in Ohio? What specifically would you look to change?
Well, I think that what the gentleman is talking about is the DeRolf decision that where indeed the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that our formula for funding K through 12 schools was unconstitutional. However, having exhausted all of their tools through the courts, nothing happened, nothing changed. The state legislature, and he's correct, the governors have come and gone, state legislators have come and gone, and nothing has changed. To me, I would hope that the courts would have put some teeth in that. There's no teeth in that. It could not be enforced. So if you start putting, the legislature in jail for stuff like that, maybe then they'd pass some, maybe then they'd go back and do what they're supposed to do. I don't have any hope that that is going to happen. However, I do think that the only way to level the playing field for all of Ohio's children is to have that formula changed and to do it from the state rather than from municipalities.
Well, you know, it was 1997 that the court in the original DeRolf decision said that the system was unconstitutional, and they were right. It was unconstitutional then, and it still is. If anything, it's gotten worse in the last 4 years. Now, why did they find it to be unconstitutional? And you don't have to be a constitutional scholar to understand why, because they made it real clear. They said you shouldn't have a funding system that is based almost entirely on local property taxes. Now, why is that? Not just because we don't necessarily like to pay property taxes, but because some districts have a big property tax base and some don't have a sufficient property tax base. And if you have a constitution, which we do, which says that every child should be guaranteed an adequate education, how does the child get an adequate education if they happen by chance to be born into one of the districts that doesn't have a big enough property tax base? So that's a responsibility that we need to accept as a state. If we don't do that, in those poorer districts, you will have class sizes that are too big. You won't have the kind of technology you need in the classroom. You won't have the individualized attention. You won't have all-day kindergarten. You won't have early childhood education. All of the things, all of the ingredients that we know make for an effective education. What has happened in the last 4 years? And again, I'll speak for our friend who isn't here today. He would certainly say that he's for education, but they have cut hundreds of millions of dollars out, and they have transferred money into some of the worst performing for-profit charter schools in the state, and that is a recipe for disaster.
That's a great segue into my question. The charter school situation is out of control. We have David Brennan with White Hat, who has been taken to his case has gone to the Ohio Supreme Court. He thinks that furniture and computers that are bought with tax dollars belong to him personally if the school closes. We had the FBI that is actually going into these charter schools, not only in Ohio, but in states all over the country, investigating fraud and theft. And the situation gets worse and worse and worse. And then we have them paying the for-profit folks helping John Kasich in his campaign. So my question is, in your role as governor, what would you do to either put a stop to this situation or to slowly help it improve?
Well, I sure agree with your question and everything that you referred to in your question, because we are now, the charter school experiment is now on pace within a couple years to be spending $1 billion. $1 billion. Now, a couple $100 million of that is just for online charter schools, which have some of the worst performances and some of the least accountability and some of the worst dropout rates that we've ever seen anywhere in the country. So if it's an experiment, it seems to be failing over and over and over again, but there's no accountability on the charter school side of the equation. Governor Kasich loves to talk about holding teachers accountable. Why shouldn't for-profit charter school operators be held accountable? And the answer to that is real simple: money. It's because the folks running those companies are enormous donors, and they have paid for the lack of accountability that they're now operating under. And the answer to the question is going to be tougher, except to just say that I would push for the same types of oversight that our public schools have to live under. We should try to demand. In my opinion, it's public money, so it's the public's business, and we need to make sure that if charter schools are unaccountable and they aren't performing for students, they should lose that money. We should put that investment into something like early childhood education. We're one of the worst states in the country for early childhood education. That would be a much better investment than what we're seeing in some of those for-profit charter schools.
I do not support for-profit charter schools. I think that education is far too important to us, to our communities, for it to become a profit-making venture. I think it needs to be a about educating our young people. But we have to acknowledge the fact that there's something very, very wrong with our school system. Our public school systems haven't worked well for many, many years, and I frequently share the fact that I did not graduate from high school, and the statistics that talk about, I did graduate from college, by the way, but the statistics that talk about Latinos who don't graduate from high school are virtually the same as they were when I dropped out of high school, and I'm 60 years old. So certainly our public school system is failing somebody. It's failing people like myself. And I think that, so we do have to fix them, but we don't fix them by breaking them worse, by taking the money out of them and putting them into for-profit entities, but that is a tough nut to crack. And the reality is there is a lot of political clout behind those for-profit ventures, and it will take the parents, the students, and the teachers banding together to demand public schools be strengthened.
Considering that the Supreme Court has effectively declared that affirmative action may be banned by state legislatures, what plans do you have to encourage or desist the continuation of that institution?
Go ahead, Mr. FitzGerald.
Okay. Well, I would point to some things that we're doing right here in Cuyahoga County. One of the things that I tried to implement as a policy for Cuyahoga County is that when we're having these big development projects, which we're in the middle of a lot of development projects, particularly in downtown Cleveland, as you can probably see as you travel around downtown, I want to make sure that when we're spending that much money, that a lot of the economic benefit is actually getting to folks that need it. And that includes people that have been locked out of the economy. And that includes women and it includes minorities. And so for the first time in the history of Cuyahoga County, we're doing what's called an economic disparity study so that we can continue or actually expand the efforts that we have to make sure that when we spend money on development projects that it's more equitably distributed to communities that maybe have been locked out. And that is a big problem. So I'm in favor of as much inclusion as possible, not just because it's good for the minority community, but because we're not going to succeed economically if we have a certain segment in society that is almost permanently locked out of the middle class and almost permanently locked out of real economic progress. So we'll have to live with whatever rules the courts have designed, but as a matter of fact, even earlier today, I told my staff we need to proceed full steam ahead so that by the time my term ends as county executive, we can get those policies in place, and I hope that we will.
Okay, so my solution for that, and I think that is a very, very hard issue, but I think the reality is that many of us are going to completely fall out of the ability to attend universities, to attain a higher education if we don't fight back and fight back aggressively on that. I would put this back on all of the universities, all the college presidents, and I think this is a time when there should be civil disobedience. I think that our universities should stand by their principles and say, we're sorry, this is a law we're simply not going to follow.
During much of this forum, I've heard a lot of agreement between the two of you. And it just so happens that both of you are minor parties in this state of Ohio, unfortunately for way too long. So I have a two-part question. One is, do either of you have any ideas about how third parties and the Democratic Party could work together to end the Republican control over all three segments of the Ohio government? And the second part of the question is, can you focus on any specific issues that you brought up in your introductory comments that you differ on? The two that come to my mind might be, I'm not sure, but death penalty and legalization of marijuana.
Well, I would just respond to say that, yeah, we, we have good manners, and you know, we're focused on. I think we have our priorities straight as we've been engaging in this discussion. But my vision of politics, honestly, is to change the system as it currently is. It is not my intention or my interest to work with the Democratic Party. Rather, it is my intention and my interest to replace the two-party system with many smaller parties that more adequately represent the people. And honestly, I think that the largest segment of voters, if I'm not mistaken, are independents. And I think that speaks very loudly for what the people, what the voters want. So I would just say that.
What about the different issues?
Oh, I honestly haven't done an awful lot of research on Mr. FitzGerald, so I don't really know what I differ on him. I think I'm a lot more strident in being anti-fracking, and certainly I consider the Lucasville Five, who are on death row here in Ohio, to be heroes, not murderers.
Well, first, I think you're right in your observation that we have some things in common, because I mean, I respect folks that have joined the Green Party and advocate for it, because I think they're doing it for very altruistic reasons, and I respect that, and because they have a philosophy where they're trying to represent the average person. They're not a party that's captured by corporations or big business or wealthy donors, and there is one party in the state that is, and that's the Republican Party. So in the sense that we both disagree with those priorities and where they're coming from, we do have a lot in common. I would just say this, we need political reform in this state, and by that I mean a couple things. Number one is the gerrymandering system that we have in terms of designing our legislative districts according to the dictates of whoever is in power is corrupt, and it's wrong, and it's a ripoff, and it is a scam. Look, you just look at, this is basically a 50-50 state in terms of usually roughly 50-50 in terms of voting Democrats or Republicans, and yet in our congressional delegation we've got 16 members of our congressional delegation, and 12 are Republicans and 4 are Democrats. And so that whole system has become completely rigged, in my opinion. Secondly, we have got to do something dramatic in this country, but in this state in particular, to get the influence of corporate money and big money and wealthy donors out of the system. They are dominating the discussion. We've got to get some clean money into the system. And until you have that, you're going to have the typical policies that you have. And that's a disadvantage the Democratic Party has, the Green Party has, and we're going to have that problem until we get more of an element of public financing in and trying to clean up that system. You're going to continue to have pay to play. And as far as I'm not trying to ignore the disagreement part of it, but he's flashing a red card at me. I agree with her summary of some of the differences as well.
Okay. Come to the point where I'll ask you each a final question. You will have 3 minutes each to respond. It's a broader question. Since Governor took office, we've had job numbers climb, jobless rates gone down, Medicaid's been expanded so that many of the working poor who were not covered now have coverage. Taxes have been cut. If you watch his campaign ads, they paint a rosy picture out there. So the question then is, why should voters elect you? What do you bring to the table that makes you the better choice? And if it is you, you'll certainly be dealing with a Republican-dominated General Assembly. How do you avoid an Ohio version of Washington gridlock? Ms. Rios, you are first.
Okay, so I think that you are correct in stating that if I got elected to governor, as governor, that the state legislature would probably not support most of the policies that I would want to implement. And I believe that I would go back to the people. I would employ the power of the people to get policies done. And honestly, that can happen now. We need to vote out some of these people in Columbus who have been making some very bad decisions for all of us over the past few years. And I would say I would want the people to come in with me, and I would spend a great deal of time trying to reach out to experts who know how to do the things that I would like to do. Nobody governs in a vacuum, and nobody governs alone. People govern with a team of experts and a team of advocates and activists who are going to roll up their sleeves and help you get stuff done, and that's what I would do. One other thing that I think I would do is I would not take the salary of the governor, or at least not all of it. I'd have to take some of it. But I would probably take at least 50% of that and use it to create internships for young people to come in, to shadow me, to shadow my cabinet, and figure out the workings of government. And I would consider that a brigade of new thinkers, new ideas, new politicians, new leaders. And I think that's how we grow government in a different direction. But I think that the other thing I would have to say is that I think that this is, that we must take a long haul view of these changes that we seek to enact. And we need to remember that this is the first step, and there will be many, many more steps.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank the City Club for having this forum. It's been a privilege and an honor to be here. And Ms. Rios, it's been a privilege also to share this platform with you. I would say, first of all, Bob, with all due respect, some of the premises of your question are just incorrect. We're really not doing very well when it comes to economic growth. We're ranked 45th out of 50 states, Bob. That's pretty bad. All 50 states have gotten better to some extent because we're in a recovery, just like all 50 states went down during the recession. The question of that anybody that was applying any scrutiny, logical scrutiny to economic performance would be, are we doing better than the rest of the country or worse? And the answer is, according to academic Bureau of Labor statistics, we are doing worse on average, compared to the rest of the country. That's one of the reasons that John Kasich is not here. He would love to just have a 30-second television commercial conversation about that, where he can make a claim and not have to defend it. But that part of his record is not defensible because we are 45th out of 50 states, and he can't talk his way out of it. Secondly, you mentioned that taxes were cut for who? They were mostly cut for the wealthiest people in the state. But a lot of taxes were raised, Bob. So yeah, it's great to say you cut income taxes, but you have to say, how did you pay for it? So again, if you have a superficial election where you don't participate in any debates and you're not accountable for what you say, you can say, oh, I cut income taxes, and please don't ask me any more questions. But any real rational scrutiny would say, well, wait a minute, who got the tax cut and how did you pay for it? And if the answer is it was paid for by taking away seniors' homestead exemptions and raising people's property taxes, which are spiraling all over the state, and raising people's sales taxes, which especially hurts the poor because it's a regressive tax, or cutting money out of public schools, or cutting money out of local governments, which affects social services and even things like heroin treatment, then it's not a very good deal, Bob. So that's the reason that Governor Kasich isn't here. And we are one election away from going in a totally different direction if we actually focus on the real issues. We could have a state that really believes in women's rights. We could have a state that believes in workers' rights, that workers ought to have a right to organize and they ought to get paid a decent wage, that women ought to be paid equal pay for equal work. We could have a state that invests in things like early childhood education or higher education, which we didn't get a chance to really talk about, was actually affordable instead of beyond the reach of the average person, or forcing families to go into debt and take out second mortgages so that their kids can have the same opportunities that they did. Those are the kinds of things the state should be doing. Those are none of the things that the state's actually doing. That's the kind of debate and discussion that we all deserved as citizens of this state. And the reason I'm running for governor is because I believe in those things. I feel passionately about those things. I've fought for those things my whole life, and they're the same things that I would fight for as governor of the state. Thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, could we please have a round of applause for both candidates and our moderator, Bob Higgs. You three, along with the media present and our staff here working the cameras and staff making this possible, you're all doing the work of democracy, and I, for one, thank you. We've been enjoying a gubernatorial debate between Democratic candidate Ed FitzGerald and Green Party candidate Anita Rios, moderated by Robert Higgs of the Northeast Ohio Media Group. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending. Our forum is adjourned.